Shalom, greetings. The name of Messiah is of the utmost importance. The scriptures teach us that there is no other name given under the heavens among men whereby we should be saved. Therefore, we must understand the name. We must proclaim the name. It is vital for salvation. The Hebrew name of the Messiah is the equivalent of the name of Joshua, the successor of Moses. And this is prophetic because Moses could not lead the children of Israel into the promised land, but rather it was Yahushua or Joshua ben Nun, the son of Nun, who led the children of Israel into the promised land and who renewed the covenant. And that is a foreshadowing of the renewed covenant, the Brit Hadashah, what is called the new covenant. It is very important to understand. Also, we see a prophecy of the Messiah's name in Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11. There was a high priest named Yahushua, the son of Yahuzadak, and there was a prophetic event where he was crowned, and a prophecy was said over him that this man has the name of the branch, and the branch is a code word in the scriptures. In the book of Jeremiah, we see it. In other prophecies, we see that this servant, who is called the branch, is to come forth. And this branch, the Messiah, has come forth, and his name is Yahushua, and we await his return. We know that he did not have the name Jesus. This name came from Hebrew, from the form Yahushua, went into Aramaic as Yeshua, and then entered into Greek as Jesus, and then into Latin as Jesus, which then became Jesus. So it is very important to understand that the true Messiah's name, Yahushua, means Yahweh saves. This name is the name we must proclaim for salvation. However, many people in these last days have argued that it is not pronounced Yahushua, but rather Yahusha, based upon a defective spelling in the scriptures. You must understand that Hebrew has full forms and defective forms. A full form would contain all the matrix letters, or the vowel letters in Hebrew called imperia, which means the mother of reading. It would contain those letters, Yod, He, and Wah, which are literally the letters that make up the Father's name, Yod, He, Wah, He. So this is very important. So in many words, you will see it written with the vowel letters, Yod, He, and Wah, and sometimes you will see one of those letters or more of those letters dropped. And when you see it dropped, it is called a defective form. The form that contains all the letters necessary for pronunciation is called the full form. The form that is missing one or more of the imkaria, the vowel letters, is called a defective form. And this happens not just with names, but with thousands of words all throughout the Masoretic text, all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls, all throughout the most ancient artifacts that we have, whether they inscribed in stone or whether they are simply a bula with an inscription, a signet, seal in clay, which we have many of those in Paleo Hebrew. And in those Paleo Hebrew inscriptions, I can demonstrate defective spellings. And I can demonstrate full spellings in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Masoretic text. It is something that someone would have to know very early on in their journey of knowing and learning Hebrew, because it is that important. That is why in Hebrew grammars, it usually appears somewhere in the first few chapters, where they have to introduce this concept to you so that you can learn how to read the text, because it will be very confusing if someone didn't highlight this for you first. When you're reading various verses, you will notice that certain words sometimes drop the letter Yod, the letter He, or the letter Wah. For example, the common word shalom, which typically means peace or well-being, and is a greeting, often is spelled fully Shin, Lamed, Wah, Mem. The defective form is spelled Shin, Lamed, Mem. We see this in the word qadosh, which is the Hebrew word for set apart. We see that it is spelled Kuf, Dalet, Wah, Shin. And sometimes it is spelled defectively, missing the letter Wah, and spelled Kuf, Dalet, Shin. We see this for the word ephod. Ephod spelled Aleph, Pei, Wah, Dalet in its full form. And the defective form we see Aleph, Pei, Dalet. The letter Wah has been dropped. It is missing. And again, I could give you so many examples because it happens in common words, like those words that I just demonstrated for you. But it also happens in names. such as King David, or Dawid, as we say in Hebrew. The full spelling is Dalet, Wal, Yod, Dalet. The defective spelling is Dalet, Wal, Dalet. This is very important because if you did not understand the full and defective spellings, you may pronounce these words wrong, especially if you are not using the cues from the Masoretes. You see, in the Masoretic text, the Masoretes often go with defective word forms and supply the vowel point instead of the letter. And that is what happens 216 times in the Masoretic text. You have the form Yod, He, Wal, Shin, Ayin. But under the Shin, you have the kibbutz, which is pronounced as an U, which gives you the shua, which is very important. And people say, well, we don't need the vowel points. We shouldn't use the vowel points. Well, when you're using the Masoretic text, you actually have to, and a number of times, so that you understand whether it's a full or defective word form. And that is the case 216 times in the Masoretic text. And only 2 times is it spelled with the full spelling, Yod, He, Wal, Shin, Wal, Ayin. And it has the wall between the Shin and the Ayin, giving us the shua sound in those instances. So every example in the Masoretic text shows us the shua, whether through vowel pointing or through the actual letter supplied. Now, this is very important because we also have a shortened form of Yahushua that took place after the Babylonian exile. And this form is called Yeshua. And this is the form that a lot of people like to say is the Messiah's name, primarily because we see it after the Babylonian exile, so they assume that he would not have had the full name, Yahushua. But we know that he had the full name, Yahushua. And there is even a case that could be made that the shorter form, Yeshua, which is spelled Yod, Shin, Wal, Ayin, in ancient times was probably still pronounced Yahushua as a defective form. What's interesting about this form is it appears 30 times in the scriptures. 30 times is significant. And when we see it, it's always spelled the same way, Yod, Shin, Wal, Ayin. While the Yahu element disappears, we see the shua element remains, Shin, Wal, Ayin. Therefore, this example is very important, not only because it appears in the Tanakh, but also because it appears in the Peshitta, that is the Aramaic translation of the New Testament, and in the Aramaic translation of the Old Testament as well, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. It's also translated into Aramaic. And when you see the name, you see it as Yeshua, Yod, Shin, Wal, Ayin, in Aramaic. So 900 plus times it appears in the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant writings, as Yod, Shin, Wal, Ayin in Aramaic. And that maintains the shua element. Therefore, there's no reason to say that the name is Yahusha. This is a mistake. People are simply taking the defective form, the shortened form of Yahushua, and they are transliterating it. And if you transliterate the defective form without knowing proper Hebrew grammar, such as full and defective spellings, you could come up with a form like Yahusha. But this form shows ignorance in Hebrew, which is amazing because a lot of the people using it, well, they're using it because they see it in various translations that people have put out where they put the name as Yahusha. And it's amazing that those people could translate the Hebrew Scriptures at all, and they somehow didn't understand full and defective word forms, because those word forms are very important. Again, they appear in thousands of words, common words, not just names, and in all the inscriptions that we have in Paleo Hebrew or in modern Hebrew is a normal mode of Hebrew writing. And people ask, well, why does this exist in Hebrew? Well, there could be a number of reasons. It could be that writing material is very expensive. Scrolls were very expensive. And so therefore, to maintain the space on the scroll, they may have used shorter spellings. Perhaps that's the reason. There could be a variety of other reasons. We know that people believe that Hebrew is a consonantal language because a lot of words do not have vowel letters at all, such as the word melech, which means king. We don't see it with a vowel letter. We see it with vowel points in the Masoretic text, but no vowel letters, no yod, no hey, no wal. Same thing for Shabbat. Shin, Beit, Ta does not have a vowel letter, does not have the yod, the hey, or the wal. However, the vowel points are supplied in the Masoretic text. Now, many of you are probably tired of hearing me talk about the Masoretic text and you want to get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm happy to do so. But first, we had to lay this foundation so that you understand that full and defective word forms are the norm in Hebrew. And it is one of the basic elementary things that a person must understand to understand any of the scriptures. Because you will notice, if you go from one verse to another, that sometimes some of those words that you had memorized for your vocabulary for Hebrew, that they will be spelled differently, and that could throw you off. So it's the reason, again, it is usually taught in one of the first few chapters in basic Hebrew grammar. Now, when we go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see something profound. We see that the full form, Yod, He, Waw, Shin, Waw, Ayin, appears numerous times. In the book of Joshua, it appears 4 times. And that is amazing, because it does not appear in the full spelling at all in the Masoretic text. So when we look at the Dead Sea Scroll, book of Joshua, we see that we find this full spelling. But not only this, sometimes we find the defective form near it. And that seems to be to remind the reader that the full pronunciation is Yahushua and not something like Yahusha. And this is vital for understanding. Now, I've had people tell me, well, you need to go to the Paleo Hebrew, because in Paleo Hebrew, it's Yahusha. That could be furthest from the truth. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we do have the name Yahushua recorded 2 times in Paleo Hebrew. However, it is a defective form, but not the same defective form we see in the Masoretic text. It's a new form, a form that wasn't known previously. And that form is spelled Yod, He, Shin, Waw, Ayin. Again, Yod, He, Shin, Waw, Ayin, where the final waw is maintained, but the first waw is dropped. Now, some applying the same logic as the Yahusha pronunciation would say this is Yeshua. However, it is not Yeshua, because we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls the full form, which reminds us it is Yahushua, Yod, He, Waw, Shin, Waw, Ayin. However, this Paleo Hebrew form reminds us that shua has been preserved since the most ancient times. So when people are trying to say that it's Yahusha rather than Yahushua, they are simply misleading you. And maybe they are doing it unintentionally, but nonetheless, they are misleading you. The most ancient form of Yahushua doesn't even appear in Hebrew. It actually appears in Babylonian cuneiform from 2,570 years ago, when the Yahudim, the Judeans, the Jews were exiled into Babylon. They bought things, they did all kinds of things, they kept records. Those records have been found, at least some of them have been found, in what is called the Al-Yahudu archives. In the Al-Yahudu archives, we notice that all the forms that we see in the Masoretic text that begin with Yeho and Yo, they begin with Yahu. So it's not Yehonathan, like you see, it's Yahunathan. It's not Yehoshua, like they say today. It's Yahushua in the most ancient examples that we have, and the shua is maintained even in that language. So that is deeply profound, because it matches the transliteration that we would expect of the full spelling Yod, He, Waw, Shin, Waw, Ayin. So therefore, the oldest example we have is preserved, and it is Yahushua. Therefore, we know that Messiah's actual name is Yahushua. Defective spellings happen even in other names, such as Yaacob. Yaakob's name often is produced without the letter waw. That gives us the ob, Yaacob. Some people might say Yaacob, but either way, that waw sound that gives you the vowel there is sometimes dropped, and no one says Yaqba. Everyone says Yaacob. And that's for a reason. It's because of the full and defective word forms. The defective spelling is the same pronunciation as the full spelling. So this is vital for our understanding. But it's also important to understand that the name Yahushua comes to us from Moses. Moses renames the man whose name is Hoshea. Hoshea is one of the participles of Yasha, the primitive root. And the form Yeshua is also the passive participle of Yasha related to Hoshea. This is very important to understand, because when Moses is about to split the sea at the command of Yahuwah, he tells the Israelites stand still and see the Yeshuat, Yahuwah, the salvation of Yahuwah. And Yeshuat appears spelled as Yod, Shin, Wa, Ayin, Ta. Yeshuat is the form that comes from Yeshua, the full form of this word that is a word that means salvation, not to be confused with the shortened form of Yahushua's name. This is a word that appears in the text and is often spelled Yod, Shin, Wa, Ayin, Hey. That is very important. Yeshua. Now, in the Song of Moses, after they cross the sea, he begins to sing this song where he says, Azi wa Zimrat Yah, which means my strength and song is Yah. Then he goes on to say, Yehi lile Yeshua, and he has become mine unto Yeshua. So he is saying Yah has become his unto Yeshua. And when we combine the name of Yahuwah and Yeshua, we get the name Yahushua, the name of the Messiah, the name of the branch. How amazing is that? However, it's very important to understand that this appears often in the scriptures, this formula of Yahuwah's name and Yeshua, and many, many examples. And I'm going to give you a few of those right now. Now, if you go over to the book of Psalms, chapter 3, verse 8, we read in Hebrew, Le Yahuwah ha-Yeshua. In English, that means unto Yahuwah the salvation, or the Yeshua. If we go to Psalm chapter 119, we read, Sabarti le Yeshua teka Yahuwah, which translated means, I have waited for your salvation, your Yeshua, O Yahuwah. You see how this formula appears again and again. Now, let us go on to Psalm chapter 119, verse 174. Tabti le Shua teka Yahuwah. I have longed for your Yeshua, your salvation, O Yahuwah. In Jonah chapter 2, verse 9, we read, Yeshua ta le Yahuwah. Salvation is of Yahuwah. If we go over to Psalm 116, verse 13, we read, Kos Yeshuat Esa Wabeshem Yahuwah Akara, which means the cup of salvation I take, and the name of Yahuwah I call. And this is a picture of the renewed covenant when Yahushua takes the cup and passes it to his disciples, his Talmudim. This is the cup of Yeshua. This is the cup of deliverance that David described that he was taking, and he, in the process, was calling on the name of Yahuwah. And this is the importance of this passage, because we see clearly that these passages all link the name of Yahuwah with the passive participle of Yasha, which is Yeshua. So when Moses crosses the Red Sea and he begins to sing, Azi wa Zimrat Yah, wa Yehi lile Yeshua, my strength and song is Yah, and he's become mine unto salvation. It is only 2 chapters later, in Exodus chapter 17, when we first see that Hoshea is renamed Yahushua in the text. So we know that Moses was drawing from the prophetic revelation given to him while he gave the Song of the Sea to name Yahushua the Messiah. This doesn't work with Yasha. If you go look up Yasha, you will see that most of the time the form Yasha doesn't actually appear. Of course, if you look at it in the Strong's Concordance, you'll see it appearing everywhere. But if you go into the Hebrew, you're going to see forms like Nusha, Mushia. You're going to see other forms. Hoshea, Yeshua. But you're not going to really see Yasha. So it's really important to understand, because I've heard people say, well, Yahuwah's name is also called Yahuwah Yasha. Kind of like when we see Yahuwah Shalom, Yahuwah Yireh, these other titles. But no, it's not. It doesn't appear. However, you could say Yahuwah Yeshua, because that appears. That appears often. And if you combine those two elements together, you get Yahushua the Messiah, the branch. And this is very important, because this name goes all the way back 2,570 years ago to Babylon, where another man named Yahushua, several actually, are recorded in these archives. So we know that Yahushua is sure, that it is steadfast, that the name Yahusha is simply an attempt to transliterate a defective spelling. It is not based on the Paleo Hebrew, because the Paleo Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls does not say Yahusha. It says Yahushua. However, if you were using that logic that they use, it would be Yahshua. But it's not Yahshua, it's Yahushua. So we know that it's not based off the Paleo Hebrew evidence. It's not based off of the evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see that the form in Deuteronomy chapter 3 appears in the Masoretic text with the full spelling, and also in that same chapter and verse in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the modern Hebrew text, the modern Hebrew form. So we see that there are 6 examples of Yahushua spelled Yod He Waw Shin Waw Ayin in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there are 2 examples of the Paleo Hebrew spelling Yod He Shin Waw Ayin. None of those imply Yahusha. They all imply Yahushua. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, wherever you find the shortened spelling that matches the so-called Yahusha pronunciation, which is Yod He Waw Shin Ayin, you will see within the same fragment or somewhere in the same scroll the fuller spelling. So that is important. And the reason we don't have 200 and some examples in the Dead Sea Scrolls is because the Dead Sea Scrolls are largely fragmented. Now, to further prove that this is the case, let us look at the name of Moses. So in the Masoretic Hebrew, it's spelled Mem Shin He. However, in the great Isaiah scroll, the great scroll of Yahu the prophet, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see the spelling Mem Waw Shin He. And that Waw represents the O in Moshe in the modern Hebrew, or it could represent an U in Musha. But the point is, it's not the pronunciation, it's the point that the actual spelling contains a Waw in the Dead Sea Scrolls to remind you that you are to pronounce that letter. Whereas the Masoretic text prefers the defective forms. And when we go into the Masoretic text, we see Elohim, which is spelled Aleph, Lamed, He, Yod, Mem. Aleph, Lamed, He, Yod, Mem. In the same scroll of Isaiah, we see the spelling Aleph, Lamed, Waw, He, Yod, Mem. The letter Waw is reintroduced, or actually, you shouldn't say reintroduced because it's older than the Masoretic text. So the Masoretic text prefers the defective spelling, but that spelling doesn't appear anywhere in the Masoretic text, the one that appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we need to understand that the Dead Sea Scrolls prefer the longer forms to remind us of how to pronounce it. Whereas the Masoretes dotted the document and used defective forms, probably from another source, in which they remind us with dots where the Waw should be or where the Yod should be in places where it was dropped. So it is very basic Hebrew and is very important. I think that everyone who's listening to my voice wants to get the name of Messiah correct. We want to call on Yahuwah with one accord, and we want to profess the Messiah with one accord. And the only way to do so is to pronounce the name as Yahushua, because all the evidence combined proves that the Messiah of Israel is the Yeshua of Yahuwah, the salvation of Yahuwah. And the only correct way to pronounce that in the ancient Hebrew is Yahushua. Remember, in the Babylonian cuneiform, it is Yahushua. Modern day, they say Yehoshua because of the vowel points in the Masoretic text. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's no vowel points. It's Yahushua. So brothers and sisters, look at the evidence. Pray about this. It's very important to fast and pray and to seek the Almighty concerning this revelation, because the scriptures reveal that there is only one name given among men that we should call on for salvation. We must call on Yahuwah, but we must profess his salvation, which is Yahushua. Yahuwah be with you, brothers and sisters. May he reveal this mighty truth to you, and may he seal you with his great and awesome name through the testimony of Yahushua, the branch, his servant that has come into the world, who laid down his life and who resurrected, so that we can have part in the resurrection. Yahuwah be with you. Shalom, shalom. For more information about the name Yahuwah and the name Yahushua, please pre-order my new book, The Creator's Name Revealed, Unlocking the Mystery of the Tetragrammaton. You can pre-order at messengerofthename.com. Shalom.